My heart pounded, the documents I saw, and now, this truth. Everything seems to make sense. They have been experimenting with this since ages, secret military experiments all over the globe. I stopped for a while. My curiosity stumbled, and I lay back on my chair. Still, I wanted to carry on, read more. In those pages I read. Title: The Genesis of the Beast. I had always been captivated by the human body. How it's designed to stand tall, move with grace, and function despite its inherent fragility. The human skeleton is a masterpiece, built for efficiency, with each bone intricately shaped to aid in movement. But no matter how wondrous it is, the human body is also delicate. Our joints creak, our bones snap, and our spines, those fragile vertebrae, bend under the weight of life. I realized this as I looked at my own hands, so capable and yet so vulnerable. Inside them, the marrow pulses with life, producing blood, the essence of existence, but also the shadow of fragility that reminds us just how easily life could be snuffed out. But then I thought about the bones of the wolf, so different, so much more than human bones. The wolf's spine is taut, coiled for motion, every vertebra a spring that lets the creature pounce, pivot, and strike with precision. Its bones were not built for balance or grace, but for power. Their jaws are designed to crush, bone, flesh, muscle. Nothing is safe from those teeth. I could almost feel them, hear them crunching as I imagined a wolf locking its jaw around something. Anything. And then there was me, Dr. Alan Pierce, a geneticist with a vision so bold, so dangerous, that it bordered on madness. I had spent my entire career studying the fragile intricacies of the human body, how it bends, breaks, and heals, and contrasting it with the terrifying efficiency of the wolf, a creature built for survival, strength, and lethal precision. In these two forms, I saw the answer to a question that had tormented me for years. What if we could merge the two? What if we could create a creature that embodied the intellect of man, combined with the primal, unstoppable predatory prowess of the wolf? The government had been generous. They had given me everything I needed, fueling my ambitions with resources and access to materials I could have only dreamed of. Capsules of secret blood, harvested from unknown sources, sources that whispered of something ancient and dangerous. Bone marrow from specimens that had been preserved under tight secrecy, the remnants of beasts long thought to be myth. They didn't ask questions, and neither did I. All that mattered was the work, the pursuit of the perfect creature, a being beyond nature, beyond human limitations. I was obsessed, driven by the idea that I could change the course of humanity's evolution. I gathered samples, blood, marrow, tissue, from werewolves, specimens that had been captured by certain secret organizations. These samples were to be the key to unlocking what I believed was the next step in human evolution. The transformation was progressing at a pace I hadn't fully anticipated, but it was all within the calculated risk. I had to take control, no more hesitation. The rats had already shown promising signs, although the fatalities were a bitter reminder of how close we were to the edge. The experiment started with the feral serum. The nanomites had reacted better than expected, rewriting the genetic sequences on the fly. The first batch of rats was a disaster, too unstable, but then the survivor emerged, its muscles bulging, its body swelling at an alarming rate. That rat had become something beyond the ordinary, a specimen that would forever stand as proof that the serum was capable of transcending natural limits. I could see it in the way its body thrummed with raw power, muscles growing thicker, denser, resembling the sinewy form of a predator. The increase in BMI was staggering, 235%. I had to feed it 2 pounds of chicken a day, and still, it was growing. Its eyes began to take on an unnatural sheen, glowing slightly in the dark, and its teeth grew more pronounced, like fangs pushing through its gums. But as the experiment continued, my patience grew thin. The CIA had already set a deadline. Agent Cassandra's voice had been sharp when she called. There was no room for failure, no more time for doubt. The military had invested too much in this project, and the clock was ticking down. I couldn't allow myself to falter. The rats were merely the beginning. And so, I moved on to the human subjects, the real test. I had 5 Navy SEALs, volunteers, at least technically. They didn't fully understand the ramifications of what they had agreed to. I couldn't afford to brief them properly. They signed up out of a sense of patriotism, without fully knowing what they were stepping into. They were men of extraordinary physical and mental capabilities, and that's exactly why I chose them. Each one had a record that set them apart. But they were about to become something more, whether they liked it or not. Day 0 was the first step. I gave them the feral serum 5 times a day. The liquid was thick. Each dose carried with topmost care. I watched them carefully, tracking their reactions, noting the slight changes in their eyes, the way their muscles twitched, the way their skin seemed to harden slightly. 2 weeks into the experiment, things began to spiral. Subjects 1 and 2 didn't make it. Their bodies couldn't handle the strain. The serum was too much, too fast. But the remaining 3, they were transforming. Their bodies were changing in ways that I hadn't fully predicted, yet there was still something deeply human in their expressions. Their minds were struggling to keep up with the physical changes. The serum had triggered a rapid transformation, but it had also begun to erode their mental stability. I had to act quickly. To contain them, I placed them in reinforced nitrogen chambers, each one tethered to titanium cables. The chambers were designed to monitor their vitals, ensure that their bodies didn't break down from the inside. But even so, I could feel the shift in the air, the tension. These men were no longer just soldiers. Subject 4, however, was something else entirely. It was performing better than I ever expected. I had to move him to Chamber 12 Alpha, far more secure than the other containment units. I saw the way his body reacted to the serum, his muscles swelling, his bones becoming harder, denser, like steel. He was evolving at a pace that left me both in awe and fear. His raw strength was far surpassing the other subjects, and yet, it came at a cost. His temper was growing unstable. The rage in his eyes was unmistakable. It was only a matter of time before I would lose control of him. And I knew it. The surgeries were next, the final stage of the transformation. I had to ensure that the modifications would be permanent, that their bodies would not regress into their previous forms. I began to graft the wolf elements to their skeletal structures, reinforced alloys that fused with their bones. The spine was reinforced with titanium, the ribs restructured to enhance the natural flexibility, and the skull had been fitted with steel-like tendrils that connected directly to the jaw. These were no longer ordinary men. They were weapons, created for war, designed to become the ultimate force. Then came the lunar EMP rays, the final test. I had calculated that the electromagnetic pulse would push the modifications to their limits, supercharging the nanomites and solidifying the bond between their human biology and the wolf-like enhancements. I could only hope that it would work as intended. The final modification would trigger the final surge of strength. The CIA's demand was clear: 1,500 pounds of raw power. And it worked. The tests showed that Subject 4 had far exceeded expectations. He had surpassed the 1,500-pound mark. But there was a problem. As their strength grew, their minds began to falter. They had lost their human consciousness. It was like a switch had flipped. They were no longer the soldiers I had worked with. They were feral, no longer aware of who they were or what they had become. They were predators, pure and simple. A monster born from science. I watched them, their bodies thrumming with power, their instinct heightened, their movements more fluid than anything human. But in their eyes, there was nothing. No recognition, no humanity. They were gone. The power I had unlocked was beyond anything I had imagined, but it came at a cost I hadn't fully understood until now. I had created the ultimate weapon, a force of nature that was both magnificent and terrifying. As I watched them in their containment units, the weight of what I had done settled on my shoulders. The CIA had their weapon, but at what cost? This was no longer a human. This was a beast forged for combat, capable of tearing through armored vehicles with the same ease it could crush a human skull. His agility, despite the weight, was still terrifying. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, ready to strike at a moment's notice. The sheer size and strength of these subjects demanded resources beyond normal human capacity. They had to be fed 500 pounds of meat every 10 hours just to maintain their explosive energy levels. Even that wasn't enough to sustain them fully. It was a constant cycle of feeding and monitoring. I had to triple the tranquilizer shots to keep them sedated enough to function in their containment units. The sedation wasn't perfect, but it was the only way to prevent their instincts from taking over completely. Despite the intervention, Their aggression was mounting, and the feral part of their minds, still human but fading rapidly, was becoming impossible to suppress. One fateful day it happened. The balance broke. It was as if the last vestige of humanity within Subject 4 disappeared. His primal instincts took over completely. The last tranquilizer shot, even at triple the dosage, had no effect. The creature tore through its reinforced chamber, ripping through the titanium cables as though they were nothing more than paper. In the chaos, the worst possible outcome occurred. The interns, young, naive, unaware of the monstrosities being created in the lab, have been standing too close to the containment area. Before anyone could react, Subject 4 charged. In a blur of movement, the beast lunged, and with a sickening crunch, it chomped off the heads of 4 interns in a single brutal motion. The lab was filled with the sound of bone breaking, the gruesome scene unfolding in mere seconds. The air was thick with the scent of blood and panic. The remaining researchers were paralyzed with terror, unsure of how to contain the beast or even how to survive. Panic spread fast. The incident was beyond containment, and before I knew it, the SWAT teams had been called in. But they were no match for the raw power that had been unleashed. I could only stand there, a mix of regret and disbelief flooding through me, as the SWAT unit struggled to deal with the carnage I had unintentionally triggered. But even they weren't enough. The creatures were relentless, moving with the fury of a wild storm. Too fast, too strong. That's when the military decided they needed a different approach. Snipers. A team of highly trained marksmen set up positions at distant points around the building. From hidden vantage points, they readied their 50 BMG sniper rifles, prepared to take the beasts down at all costs. The shots rang out, loud and deafening. The snipers, maintaining perfect distance and steady aim, began firing. T took multiple rounds from the powerful rifles to penetrate their mutated forms, powerful enough to kill even these monstrous hybrids. With each shot, the beasts faltered, slowing but not yielding. But their strength was waning under the barrage. Simultaneously, the building was locked down. Military personnel sealed off all exits, trapping the creatures inside. The automated lockdown systems kicked in, ensuring no one could escape or let them out. Locking the beasts inside with no way of getting out. It was the only way to ensure the creatures wouldn't escape to the outside world. But at what cost? The snipers fired again, their precision shattering the beasts' remaining resistance. Finally, the creatures collapsed, their monstrous forms crumpling to the ground, still and lifeless. The lab was silent, the weight of our failure suffocating. The building was locked down, but the nightmare wasn't over, it was just contained. In my pursuit of pushing the boundaries of science, I had created something far worse than I could ever have imagined. Then the last line simply read, "Experiment failed." Now I was more curious. Stay tuned for the last part. Thank you.